Concerns over big tech's dominance continue to take center stage today, this time in a New York Times Magazine in-depth report. It's called The Case Against Google. Critics say the search giant is squelching competition before it begins, should the government step in. Joining us here at Post 9 this morning, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times Magazine, Charles Duhigg, joins us today. Welcome.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I mean, the piece is largely about, and you tell it through a personal lens, through some specific characters, on how Google is able to essentially crush innovation, I guess, is not putting too far.
At this point, Google is the front door for the internet for millions, perhaps billions of people, right? If you want to find something on Google or on the internet, you go to Google. And so that means that if Google decides that they don't like your website, if you get downranked and you don't show up on the first page, you're essentially invisible. And that's what's happened to a number of people, including the folks that I profiled in the Times. They ran afoul of Google's rules. Some would say because Google thought that they didn't want that type of competition. And as a result, their business just evaporated.
Right. And then the next step is to argue or to have a debate about the degree to which antitrust laws are effective in remedying that.
That's exactly right. And this debate is going on actively right now, both here and in Europe, all over the world. Europe has already said that Google is an illegal monopoly, that it needs to change how it behaves. And there's a lot of pressure in the U.S. for our regulators to do the same thing and perhaps treat it as they treated Microsoft in the 1990s or Standard Oil, which they broke up into 32 companies a century ago.
As somebody who comes from the magazine world, this is what, 8,000 word article.
It's a long article.
In magazine publishing, that is an incredible amount of space to dedicate to a report, and it speaks to just how important this is. Something that jumped out in this to me. The FTC staff, it turned out, had been quietly collecting complaints about Google for years. How come nothing has come of this sooner? I mean, this has been going on since at least 2012.
For a long time. And the Wall Street Journal, I'll say, was great on reporting this. They actually got us the report because the FTC accidentally emailed some of their reporters an internal confidential communication report that they had released. But what's important is that some of the FTC staff actually recommended over a decade ago that the FTC ought to sue Google, that it was violating antitrust law. But the FTC commissioners, which is their right, said, no, we don't think that we should do this. Now, there's been some questions about why they did that. It was under the Obama administration, and the administration was close to Google. But the point being that the system said, we're not going to go forward with this. But there's been a real change in attitudes, right? People love Google, and I love Google. Everyone loves Google. It's what we use to find stuff on the online. But there has been a growing realization of how dangerous it is to have these mega corporations, that we're no longer living in a world where competition is one click away. There's a handful of companies, just 5 of them, that control almost everything online now.
But Charles, isn't part of the issue that antitrust law, as we have it in the United States especially, wasn't built for these types of companies? And companies like Google, like Facebook, have done a really nice job operating within the letter of the law as far as it's been written in the past. And the question I have is, does the U.S. need to adopt something more like European antitrust law, where it's more about, do you harm competition versus do you harm consumers? Because Google's defense all along is, yeah, our competitors might not like it, but this is better for the user. Look how much they're using it.
It's a great question, and that's the debate that's been going on for a couple of decades now, right? How should the laws be designed in order to get the best outcomes? And what's important to realize is that antitrust is not about justice, right? We don't punish companies because they're successful. Rather, it's politicians sitting down saying, this is the type of economy we want to have. We either want to have giants or we don't. Giants are okay as long as consumers benefit, or we want competition, and so we think that giants, once they reach a certain size, should be hamstrung by certain rules. It's a really important debate. It's the debate that's taking place right now, and the digital economy only makes it more complicated because we know that companies like Facebook and Google, they get better as they get bigger. That's network effects. And the question becomes, how big should the government allow them to get before we say it's enough?
Would you argue that your piece argues for a breakup or not?
I would say that my piece argues that there are real legitimate questions that should be asked, and that I don't know if a breakup is the right remedy, but most importantly, what I would argue is that an investigation is oftentimes the remedy itself. That's what happened with Microsoft, right? Basically, the U.S. government lost in court when it sued Microsoft. Even though it won, it really lost. But just the investigation was enough to get Microsoft to change how it behaves. And as a result, they don't compete with Google. They don't crush Google when they could have. Google becomes a huge company. Similarly, if the U.S. government was to say that they were investigating Google and thinking about antitrust against them, then you would see a lot of changes in how that company behaves.
Do you go into at all why Bing was not an effective offset?
Well, it's a good question, right? How many people use Bing? Not very many.
And they had the resources of one of the largest companies in the world.
That's absolutely right. And this is one of the things we know about the digital economy is it tends to be winner take all, right? Whoever gets there first often ends up winning, which is great in some respects, but in other respects it starts raising questions. How do we need to curb that? How big is too big?
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.